The glow of Eleanor's phone screen cast a sickly blue light in the dimly lit nursery. Her hand trembled, the hand she'd just used to smooth the cashmere blanket over the empty crib. On the screen, a world away in St. Bart's, her husband Richard was smiling. He was on the beach, his arm wrapped possessively around a blonde in a barely there bikini. The woman's own hand was splayed protectively over her own gently rounded stomach. The caption, posted by a mutual acquaintance and tagged for the world to see, was a gut punch. "Celebrating new beginnings. Congrats Richard and Chloe on their Babymoon." The silence in their Greenwich, Connecticut home was a living thing. It had once felt peaceful, a testament to the serene, orderly life Eleanor had carefully curated. Now it was suffocating, amplifying the frantic jackhammer of her own heart. Just an hour ago, she had been humming, arranging a bouquet of white hydrangeas on the marble island in their cavernous kitchen. At 7 months pregnant, every movement was deliberate, a slow and graceful dance with the new life she carried. Richard was on a critical business trip to finalize a merger in Singapore. He'd kissed her goodbye, his hand lingering on her swollen belly, whispering, "I'll be back before you know it, Ellie. Take care of our little guy." Their little guy? A son. They'd painted the nursery a soft dove gray, assembled the crib from a high-end Swedish designer, and folded tiny, impossibly soft onesies into neat piles. Their life was a masterpiece of modern success, featured in architectural digests and whispered about at charity galas. Richard Vance, the self-made tech mogul with the Midas touch. Eleanor Vance, the graceful art history major-turned-perfect wife, the envy of their social circle. It was all a beautiful, fragile lie, and it had just been shattered by a single Instagram post. Her first reaction was denial. A vicious, ugly prank. A misunderstanding. Richard had a common name. But there was no mistaking his face, the smug, confident smile she'd fallen in love with. There was no mistaking the custom Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, the one she'd given him for their 5th anniversary. And Chloe. Eleanor knew her. Chloe Sterling, the ambitious junior analyst from his firm, the one with the razor-sharp mind and an even sharper ambition in her eyes. The one Richard had dismissed as a kid, eager to learn. Eleanor sank onto a ridiculously expensive velvet stool, her breath catching in a ragged sob. The phone felt slick in her palm. She scrolled, her thumb moving with a morbid, detached curiosity. More pictures. Richard and Chloe clinking champagne glasses, sparkling cider for her, the caption noted with a winking emoji. Richard rubbing sunscreen on Chloe's back. A close-up of their hands, intertwined, Chloe wearing a diamond bracelet that Eleanor recognized. It was from a set Richard had bought in Antwerp. He had given Eleanor the necklace. "A matched set," he'd said, "one for my one and only." The betrayal was a physical force, a wave of nausea that threatened to buckle her. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the audacity, the cruelty, a Babymoon. He had taken another pregnant woman on a trip to celebrate their child, while his own pregnant wife sat at home, nesting, waiting for him, trusting him. He wasn't in Singapore closing a deal. He was in paradise, building a new life on the ashes of theirs. The psychological torment was immediate and absolute. Every shared memory felt tainted. Every loving word he'd ever spoken now seemed like a line from a script. Had any of it been real? The way he'd cried when the doctor confirmed the heartbeat? The nights he'd spent talking to her belly, telling their son about the future he'd build for them? It was a meticulously crafted performance. She hadn't just been a wife. She'd been an audience. A cold, hard fury began to crystallize beneath the pain. It started in her gut, a protective instinct for the child inside her, a primal rage against the man who had so casually discarded them both. He thought she was just a pretty accessory, a docile part of the elegant backdrop of his life. He had grossly, fatally underestimated her. She pushed herself off the stool, her movements no longer graceful but rigid with purpose. She walked through their silent, perfect house, a monument to a shared dream that had only ever been hers. She passed the living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Long Island Sound, the formal dining room where they'd hosted governors and CEOs, the library with its leather-bound first editions he'd never read. It was all a set, a beautiful, empty stage. Her reflection in the darkened window showed a woman she barely recognized. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a terrifying clarity. The gentle softness was gone, replaced by something flinty and sharp. He had left her alone in this glass house, but he had forgotten one thing. Shattered glass has the sharpest edges. She walked into Richard's home office, a space of dark wood and polished chrome that always smelled faintly of his expensive cologne. Her fingers flew across the keyboard of her laptop, her mind working with a speed and precision that surprised her. She wasn't looking for more photos. She was looking for a name. The best divorce attorney in New York. Not just the best, the most ruthless. She found her in under 5 minutes. Isabel Izzy Flores. A name whispered in hushed, fearful tones in the circles they ran in. A shark who swam in the bloodied waters of high-net-worth divorces and left a trail of financially decimated ex-husbands in her wake. Eleanor picked up her phone. Her hand was steady now. She wasn't the weeping, broken woman from 10 minutes ago. She was a mother protecting her child. She was a woman fighting for her life. She dialed the number, her voice clear and cold as ice when the assistant answered. "My name is Eleanor Vance," she said, staring out at the cold, dark water. "I need to speak with Ms. Flores. It's an emergency. Tell her my husband is Richard Vance, and tell her he just took his pregnant mistress on a Babymoon." Isabel Flores's office on the 50th floor of a midtown skyscraper was less a law office and more a command center for strategic warfare. The view of Central Park was breathtaking, a sprawling panorama of green against a backdrop of steel and glass, but Izzy herself rarely looked at it. Her focus was always on the person sitting opposite her in a plush but unforgiving leather chair. Today, that person was Eleanor Vance. Izzy, a petite woman in a razor-sharp Armani suit, listened without interruption. Her expression was impassive, but her dark, intelligent eyes missed nothing. The slight tremor in Eleanor's hand as she held her cup of tea, the rigid set of her jaw, the fierce, protective way she unconsciously cradled her belly. She'd seen hundreds of women in Eleanor's position, blindsided, heartbroken, and terrified. But she also saw the spark of something else in Eleanor's eyes. Not just pain. Fire. "He served you a perfect life on a silver platter," Izzy said when Eleanor finished, her voice calm and even. "And he expected you to be grateful enough to eat whatever crumbs he threw you. It's a classic narcissist's playbook. The grand gestures, the public adoration, it's all for him. You weren't his partner, you were his greatest acquisition." The words were brutal, but strangely validating. Eleanor felt a knot of self-blame loosen in her chest. For the past 24 hours, she had replayed their entire relationship, questioning her own judgment, her own intuition. Had she been blind? Willfully ignorant? "He made me feel like the center of his universe," Eleanor whispered. "His universe has only one sun," Izzy countered, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on a thick file that already sat on her desk. Her team had been working since Eleanor's call the previous afternoon. "Richard Vance. Net worth, liquid, estimated at $450 million. Assets, including real estate, art, and shell corporations, push it closer to $1 billion. The prenuptial agreement you signed is, to put it mildly, draconian. It was designed to leave you with next to nothing." Eleanor nodded. She remembered signing it in a haze of love and trust. Richard had called it a formality, a piece of paper to appease his investors. "I trust him," she'd said. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Trust is a luxury we can no longer afford," Izzy said, leaning forward. "He has committed a material breach of the contract of your marriage, not just emotionally but publicly. The infidelity clause in this state is weak, but public humiliation, that gives us leverage. He has tarnished his own brand by associating it with a tawdry public affair, and his brand is everything to him." Izzy laid out the strategy. It wasn't about a quiet, dignified separation. That's what Richard would want, what he would expect. He'd offer her a settlement, generous by normal standards but insulting given his wealth, and a non-disclosure agreement that would gag her for life. He would paint her as a scorned woman, hysterical and unreasonable. "We are not going to play his game," Izzy declared. "We are going to set the board. He made his move in public, so we will make ours in public. He chose to humiliate you, so we will respond with a show of force he can't ignore." The plan was audacious, theatrical, and terrifyingly brilliant. They wouldn't just file for divorce. They would have Richard served personally at the 5-star Rosewood Laguanahani Resort in St. Bart's, in the middle of his romantic, sun-drenched getaway. "We'll use a local process server," Izzy explained, a glint in her eye. "Someone who knows the resort, who can get close. We'll make sure it happens somewhere visible. The pool, the restaurant. We want Chloe to see it. We want the other guests to see it. We want the message to be unequivocal. The party is over." Eleanor felt a jolt of fear, quickly followed by a surge of adrenaline. Part of her, the old Eleanor, shrank from the idea of such a public confrontation. But the new Eleanor, the one forged in the fire of the last day, understood the necessity of it. Richard only respected one thing: power. To show weakness was to lose. "What about Chloe?" Eleanor asked, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "Her pregnancy?" Izzy's face softened for a fraction of a second. "We have a private investigator looking into her. My gut tells me there's more to this story. Women like Chloe Sterling don't just stumble into affairs with billionaires. They have a plan. For now, she is a complication, but she may also be a weakness we can exploit. Let's see how she reacts when she realizes the golden goose she's holding is about to fly a coop built on very shaky legal ground." They spent the next 2 hours going over financials, timelines, and the brutal realities of what was to come. Richard would retaliate. He would cut off her credit cards, try to lock her out of their accounts, use their friends to isolate her. "He will try to break you," Izzy warned, her gaze steady and unwavering. "He will tell you that you are nothing without him. He will use your pregnancy, your emotions, against you. You must be prepared. From this moment on, you are not a wife. You are a CEO of a new company, you, Inc., and your only goal is a hostile takeover of your own life." Eleanor walked out of the office and into the late afternoon sun, feeling as if she had shed a skin. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in her chest, but it was no longer her anchor. The fear was present, but it was a motivator, not a paralytic. For the first time, she wasn't just reacting to Richard's betrayal. She was acting. She was no longer a victim in his story. She was the hero of her own. She hailed a cab, her hand resting on her belly, a silent promise to the life within. "We're going to be okay," she thought. "No, we're going to be more than okay. We're going to be formidable." The air in St. Bart's was thick with the scent of salt and hibiscus, a warm, languid embrace that promised luxury and escape. At a poolside table at the Rosewood, shaded by a crisp white umbrella, Richard Vance laughed, a deep, easy sound that made heads turn. He raised his glass of rosé to Chloe, whose blonde hair shimmered like spun gold in the Caribbean sun. "To us," he said, his eyes crinkling in the way that always made him look boyish and charming. "To our new beginning." Chloe smiled, a practiced, perfect smile, and lightly touched her glass to his. To our son, she corrected softly, her hand drifting down to her stomach. She was wearing a flowing white sundress, the picture of serene, glowing motherhood. Everything about their tableau was perfect, curated for an audience, even if the only audience was the collection of hedge fund managers and European socialites scattered around the turquoise pool. Richard felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Everything was going according to plan. The public reveal of his relationship with Chloe had caused the expected ripples, but he would manage the narrative. He would be the man who had the courage to leave a cold, passionless marriage for true love, for the chance to be a father again with a woman who truly understood him. Eleanor, he was sure, would be devastated, but she would be manageable. She was gentle, compliant. He would give her a generous settlement, and she would fade quietly into the background. "I was thinking we should look at properties in Moustique," he said, leaning back. "A place for just the three of us. Complete privacy." Chloe's eyes lit up. "Oh, Richard, that would be a dream." It was then that a man approached their table. He was a local, dressed in the resort staff's polo shirt and khaki shorts, but he carried himself with an air of purpose that was slightly out of place. He smiled politely. "Mr. Richard Vance?" he asked, his voice calm. "Yes?" Richard replied, a hint of impatience in his tone. He disliked interruptions. "I have a delivery for you, sir." The man extended a large manila envelope. Richard frowned, annoyed. "I'm not expecting anything. Can't this wait?" "I was instructed it was urgent," the man said, his smile never wavering. He placed the envelope firmly on the table, next to the chilled bottle of rosé. Meanwhile, back in Greenwich, Eleanor was sitting on the floor of the nursery, surrounded by boxes. She was packing. Not her things, but the baby's. The dove-gray paint on the walls seemed to mock her. With every tiny outfit she folded and placed into a box, she felt a pang of grief for the life she had imagined. But with it came a cleansing resolve. This wasn't her son's room. His room would be in a home, not a museum of lies. Her phone buzzed. A single text from Izzy. "Package delivered." Eleanor's breath hitched. She closed her eyes, picturing the scene. She imagined the sun, the pool, the look of utter shock on Richard's face. A small, grim smile touched her lips. Back in St. Bart's, Richard tore open the envelope, his irritation turning to confusion, then to disbelief. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents. He scanned the first page, his face draining of color. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Vance versus Vance. His eyes darted down the page, catching phrases that made the blood pound in his ears. Irreconcilable differences. Adultery. Request for exclusive use of the marital home. Freezing of all joint assets. "Richard, what is it?" Chloe asked, her voice laced with concern. He didn't answer. He felt a cold dread wash over him, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a broke kid with nothing to his name. It was the feeling of losing control. This wasn't supposed to happen. Eleanor wasn't supposed to fight back. Not like this. Not so fast, so publicly. He looked up from the papers, his eyes wild. He saw the process server standing a discreet distance away, talking quietly into his phone. He saw the other guests at the pool, some of whom were now watching them with undisguised curiosity. And he saw Chloe, her perfect smile gone, replaced by a mask of anxious confusion. "What is that?" she demanded, reaching for the papers. He snatched them away. "It's nothing," he snarled, his voice a low growl. The charming facade had vanished, replaced by the raw, predatory anger that lay just beneath the surface. It's a mistake, but he knew it wasn't a mistake. It was a declaration of war. The location, the timing, the public nature of it all. It was a move of calculated genius, designed for maximum humiliation. It was a chess move, and he hadn't even known they were playing a game. He had seen Eleanor as a pawn. He had just been put in check by a queen. His tropical paradise had just become a battlefield. He stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair with a clatter that drew more eyes. "We're leaving," he said, his voice tight with fury. "Now!" He threw a handful of cash on the table and strode away from the pool, leaving Chloe scrambling to gather her things, the legal papers clutched in his white-knuckled fist. The sun felt cold on his skin. The private jet sliced through the night sky, a vessel of silent, simmering rage. Richard hadn't spoken a word since they'd left the resort, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek. Chloe had tried to ask questions, her initial anxiety hardening into frustrated indignation, but his glacial silence had eventually defeated her. She sat across from him, watching him stare at the divorce papers as if he could incinerate them with the sheer force of his fury. His paradise had been violated, his authority challenged, and the carefully constructed narrative of his new life had been torpedoed before it had even set sail. When they finally landed at a private airfield in Westchester, a black SUV was waiting. The drive to the Greenwich estate was short and tense. Richard stormed into the house, shouting his wife's name. "Eleanor!" Eleanor was waiting for him in the grand, two-story living room. She wasn't crying. She wasn't hiding. She stood by the cold, dark fireplace, a single lamp casting a warm glow around her. She was wearing a simple black dress that accentuated her pregnancy, her hands resting calmly on her belly. She looked serene, composed, and utterly immovable. The sight of her quiet strength infuriated him more than any tears or hysterics could have. "You've got a hell of a nerve," he spat, throwing the thick envelope of legal papers onto the coffee table between them. "What is this? Some kind of sick joke?" "The only joke, Richard," Eleanor said, her voice even and clear, "was our marriage. I've just stopped pretending to find it funny." He stalked towards her, his 6-foot frame looming, a tactic of physical intimidation that had always worked before. "You have no idea what you're doing. You're being hysterical. You're pregnant. Your hormones are all over the place. You see one stupid picture online and you try to blow up our lives?" He was trying to gaslight her, to frame her as the unstable, irrational one. Eleanor didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. "My hormones are not the issue here. Your second child with your mistress is, a fact you conveniently forgot to mention when you were packing for your business trip." The direct hit landed. Richard's face contorted with rage. "Chloe has nothing to do with this. Our marriage was over long before her." "Was it?" Eleanor countered, her voice dangerously soft. "Was it over when you were holding my hand during the ultrasound? Was it over when you were whispering names for our son into my ear at night? Or does over just mean any time you're not physically in my presence?" He saw he was losing ground, so he switched tactics, from anger to feigned concern. "Ellie, listen to me. This isn't you. This is that shark lawyer putting ideas in your head. Flores, right? She's a parasite who gets rich off of other people's misery. We can handle this ourselves, quietly. I will take care of you. I'll make sure you and the baby have everything you need." "Everything I need?" She let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of humor. "You think this is about money? This is about the spectacular cruelty of taking another pregnant woman on a babymoon. It's about building a nursery for our son in this house, while you were building a whole new family behind my back. You didn't just cheat, Richard. You tried to erase me. You tried to replace me." It was then that Chloe appeared in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. She had been listening from the hall. "Richard," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Maybe we should go." Richard whirled on her. "Stay out of this!" Eleanor looked past her husband, her eyes locking with Chloe's for the first time. There was no animosity in her gaze, only a cool, pitying assessment. "He's right," Eleanor said to Chloe. "You should probably stay. You're a part of this mess. You might as well hear it all. For instance, did he tell you about the prenuptial agreement?" Chloe looked confused. He said it wouldn't be an issue. Of course he did, Eleanor continued, her focus still on Chloe. Did he also tell you about Clause 12b, the public image provision? It states that any action by either party that brings the Vance family name into public disrepute or scandal could have significant financial repercussions. Serving him divorce papers in a public resort? That's nothing. But a billionaire's messy public affair with a junior employee while his wife is pregnant? That's a scandal. And his investors, his board, they hate scandals. A flicker of genuine fear crossed Chloe's face. She looked at Richard, who was now staring at Eleanor, his expression a mixture of shock and fury. He had never spoken to her about the specifics of his business, of his legal arrangements. He had underestimated her intelligence, her memory, her very capacity for strategic thought. "You think you're so clever," he snarled at Eleanor. "I'm learning," she replied calmly. "I had a very good teacher in the art of deception. I'm just a much faster student than you anticipated." The power in the room had shifted so completely it was palpable. Richard, who had walked in expecting to intimidate and control a sobbing, broken woman, found himself cornered. His mistress was looking at him with dawning suspicion, and his wife was looking at him as if he were a business problem to be solved, not a husband to be mourned. He took a step back, breathing heavily. "You will regret this, Eleanor. I will leave you with nothing. I will fight you with everything I have." "I know," she said. And for the first time, a hint of emotion entered her voice. Not sadness, but a deep, resonant strength. "But you are fighting for your ego and your money. I'm fighting for my child, and you have no idea what a mother is capable of. Now, I believe you and your guest have a hotel to find. My lawyer will be in touch about scheduling your supervised visit to collect your personal belongings." Mar. It was a final, devastating dismissal. With a look of pure hatred, Richard turned, grabbed a stunned Chloe by the arm, and stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard a crystal vase on a nearby table rattled. Eleanor stood alone in the silence, her body trembling with the aftermath of the confrontation. She hadn't collapsed. She had won. She walked over to the grand window and looked out into the night. The war had just begun, but she had won the first, most important battle, the one for her own self-respect. In the weeks that followed, Richard made good on his threats. The Vance financial empire, which had once been Eleanor's gilded cage, now became a weapon turned against her. Her credit cards were declined. The joint accounts were frozen by an army of high-priced lawyers claiming all funds were corporate assets. Staff at the house were dismissed, leaving her alone in the cavernous, silent estate. Friends who had once fawned over her now crossed the street to avoid her, their loyalties bought by Richard's carefully spun narrative of a beloved husband, pushed to the brink by a volatile, emotionally unstable wife. The isolation was brutal, designed to cripple her, to make her crawl back and accept whatever scraps he offered. But Richard's strategy was based on a fatal flaw. He was fighting the woman he thought he'd married, not the woman she had become. Eleanor, guided by Izzy Flores, had anticipated every move. Before the accounts were frozen, Izzy had secured a court order for substantial temporary alimony and child support, funds that were now being held in escrow. Eleanor wasn't destitute. She was financially independent for the first time in her life. The real battle, however, was being fought not in bank accounts, but in data. Izzy's team of forensic accountants and private investigators were digging into every corner of Richard's life, and they began to find things that didn't add up. The affair wasn't just a midlife crisis, it was a business transaction. The revelation came from an encrypted hard drive the investigator had managed to pull from Chloe Sterling's old work laptop before it was wiped by Richard's IT department. On it, they found a trail of emails, not between Richard and Chloe, but between Chloe and her father, Marcus Sterling. Marcus Sterling was the CEO of a rival tech firm, a man Richard had publicly despised for years. Their companies were locked in a bitter struggle for a multi-billion-dollar government defense contract. For months, Richard's company had been the front-runner, but lately they had been losing ground, outmaneuvered at every turn by Sterling's mysteriously prescient bids. It was all there, in the emails. Chloe hadn't been Richard's lovesick subordinate. She had been a corporate spy. Her father had placed her inside Richard's company. The affair was a bonus, an unexpected opportunity to get even closer, to gain his complete trust. He didn't just fall for her, Izzy explained, her voice grim as she and Eleanor reviewed the documents in a secure conference room. She was his echo. She studied him, mirrored his ambitions, validated his ego. She told him everything he wanted to hear. And while he was whispering sweet nothings to her, she was downloading his company's entire Q4 strategy and emailing it to her father. Eleanor felt a cold sickness spread through her. The betrayal had mutated into something monstrous. Her husband hadn't just been a cheater, he had been a fool, blinded by his own arrogance. His affair hadn't just destroyed their family, it was about to destroy his empire. But the true reversal, the detail that made Eleanor's blood run cold, was about the pregnancy. The investigator had flagged a series of payments from Chloe's account to a clinic in South America, known for discreet medical procedures. Following the money trail, he'd uncovered the truth. Chloe Sterling had never been pregnant. It was a phantom pregnancy, a complete fabrication. She'd used a prosthetic belly, faked ultrasound photos bought online, and carefully managed her social media to create the illusion. The Babymoon wasn't a celebration, Izzy said, her voice soft with disgust. It was a trap. They were setting him up. Once they secured the defense contract, Chloe was going to announce a tragic miscarriage, break up with a devastated Richard, and walk away with a hefty settlement for her emotional distress, all while her father's company became the new industry leader. Eleanor stared at the evidence, her mind reeling. The power dynamics she thought she understood had been completely upended. She had seen a simple, albeit brutal, story of infidelity. But this was a multi-layered corporate espionage plot, filled with morally bankrupt characters on all sides. Richard wasn't the predator she thought he was. He was the prey, a different kind of victim, but a victim nonetheless. A strange, unwelcome feeling rose in her. A flicker of pity for Richard. His ego was so vast, his belief in his own genius so absolute, that he had been completely played by a 25-year-old analyst and her calculating father. He had destroyed his marriage and family for a woman who was using him, for a child who never existed. "What does this mean for us?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely a whisper. Izzy's expression was hard as granite. "It means we have a nuclear bomb. We can expose the Sterlings for corporate espionage. We can expose Chloe for fraud. But more importantly, we can use this to end our war with Richard. He is about to be publicly humiliated in a way he can't even imagine. He's about to lose his company and his reputation. When that happens, he will be a wounded animal, and a wounded animal is dangerous and unpredictable." The choice was laid bare before Eleanor. She could release the information, watch the entire sordid mess explode in the press, and see all her enemies annihilate each other. It was a tempting thought. The ultimate revenge. But as she looked down at her own very real, very present belly, she knew she couldn't do it. A public spectacle of that magnitude would drag on for years. It would become the defining story of her child's birth, a legacy of scandal and deceit. She didn't want justice born from more destruction. She wanted peace. "No," she said, her voice firm with newfound clarity. "We're not going to release it. We're going to use it. This isn't their story to tell anymore. It's mine." She looked at Izzy, a plan forming in her mind, a plan that wasn't about revenge, but about reclamation. She would use this information not to destroy Richard, but to control him, to secure her child's future, and to finally, cleanly, cut him out of her life forever. The reversal wasn't just in the plot. It was in her own heart. She no longer wanted to see him burn. She just wanted to be free of his shadow. Richard's world was shrinking. The pressure from the sterling bids was mounting. Whispers of a mole were circulating through his board, and his legal battle with Eleanor was proving to be a costly, infuriating distraction. He was hemorrhaging money on lawyers who were being stonewalled by Izzy Flores at every turn. He tried to project an aura of calm control, but privately, he was a man besieged. He had retreated to a suite at the Carlisle Hotel with Chloe, whose presence had become increasingly grating. Her feigned maternal serenity had been replaced by a cloying anxiety about the future, a constant stream of questions about the divorce that he couldn't answer. His attempts to isolate Eleanor had backfired spectacularly. Instead of breaking, she had simply vanished from their old life, becoming a ghost in a narrative he could no longer control. His threats were met with silence. His lawyer's blustering letters were answered with concise, legally impenetrable responses from Izzy. He felt like he was punching at smoke. The unexpected blow came from the one place he never anticipated: his own family. His younger sister, Clara, had always been a peripheral figure in his life. A quiet, academic woman who had chosen a life as a university professor over the cutthroat world of finance, she had never approved of the flashy, aggressive man her brother had become. She had been fond of Eleanor, seeing in her a kindness and intelligence that Richard treated as ornamental. Clara arrived at Eleanor's house unannounced one rainy Tuesday afternoon. She looked small and uncertain on the grand doorstep, clutching a leather satchel to her chest. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor," she said the moment the door opened, her eyes welling with tears. "I know I should have called sooner. I didn't know what to say. What Richard did is unforgivable." Eleanor, surprised but touched, led her inside. They sat in the vast, silent kitchen, and for the first time in weeks, Eleanor felt a genuine connection, a warmth that had been absent from her life of strategic legal maneuvers. "He's trying to paint you as unstable," Clara said, her voice laced with anger. "He's telling everyone you're having some sort of breakdown. He actually believes it. He cannot conceive of a world where he is not the hero of the story." Clara explained that she had tried to talk to Richard, to make him see the cruelty of his actions. He had dismissed her, as he always did, calling her naive and sentimental. But in his dismissal, he had grown careless. In a fit of arrogant rage, trying to justify his actions, he had let something slip. "He was bragging," Clara said, shaking her head in disbelief, "about how he was going to protect his assets. He said, 'Eleanor signed the prenup, but even if a judge throws it out, she'll never touch the real money. She'll never even find it.'" Clara paused, taking a deep breath. "He mentioned something called the Pandora Trust. He said it was his rainy day fund, his real nest egg, completely off the books, hidden behind a firewall of offshore accounts and shell companies." Eleanor stared at her. The forensic accountants had found dozens of cleverly hidden accounts, but they suspected there was a primary vehicle, a mothership they couldn't trace. Pandora Trust. The name was almost poetic in its arrogance. "He said he set it up years ago with his first big payout," Clara continued, her hands trembling as she opened her satchel. "He was so proud of himself. He said it was his one true legacy, the one thing no one could ever take from him." She pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound journal. "This was our father's. Richard took all his financial records after he died, but I kept this. Dad was meticulous. He wrote everything down. I was looking through it last night and I found this." She opened it to a page bookmarked with a faded ribbon. On it, in their father's neat, precise script, was a list of names and numbers: an accountant in the Cayman Islands, a bank in Zurich, and at the top of the page, the heading: Richard's Pandora Project. It was the key, the Rosetta Stone to Richard's hidden empire. His father, the man whose old-school business ethics Richard had always scorned, had kept the one record that could bring it all down. Clara had come not just with sympathy, but with a weapon. "Why are you doing this, Clara?" Eleanor asked, her voice thick with emotion. Clara looked at Eleanor, her gaze direct and unflinching. "Because Richard has become a monster of his own making. He's a bully who confuses wealth with worth. You and that baby are his family, whether he admits it or not. And my father would have never, ever stood for a man who abandons his family. The alliance was forged in that quiet kitchen. A silent partnership between two women who had both been underestimated and dismissed by the same man. It wasn't about revenge anymore, not for either of them. It was about balance. It was about restoring a semblance of honor to a family name that Richard had tarnished. That evening, Eleanor met with Izzy and presented her with the journal. Izzy's eyes, usually so impassive, widened as she examined the page. She looked at Eleanor, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Pandora's box," Izzy murmured, a note of awe in her voice. He named his secret trust Pandora's box, the absolute textbook hubris. She closed the journal gently. "He thinks he's playing checkers. He has no idea we're about to tip over the entire chessboard." With the information from Clara, and the evidence about Chloe's deception, Eleanor now held all the cards. She had the means to expose his financial crimes to the IRS and the SEC, and the means to expose his personal life as a fraudulent, pathetic sham. She could destroy him utterly. But Clara's quiet dignity had reinforced her own resolve. She wouldn't become him to beat him. She would simply show him, with cold, irrefutable proof, that he had lost. The final meeting was not held in a courtroom or a lawyer's office. Eleanor, at Izzy's suggestion, chose the venue herself, the library of the Greenwich House. It was the most ostentatiously masculine room in the home, a shrine to Richard's ego, filled with leather-bound books he'd never opened and trophies from polo matches he'd barely played. It was the perfect stage for his downfall. Richard arrived alone, his face a grim mask. He looked thinner, worn down by the weeks of stress. The easy charm was gone, replaced by a brittle, defensive arrogance. He strode into the room, expecting a negotiation, a last-ditch effort from a desperate woman. He found Eleanor and Izzy waiting for him, seated at the massive mahogany desk. They didn't stand when he entered. "Let's make this quick," he said, his voice clipped. "I have a board meeting. Just give me your ridiculous final offer so my lawyers can laugh at it." Izzy smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. "There will be no offer, Richard, and there will be no negotiation. We're here to inform you of the terms of your surrender." Richard actually laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "My surrender? You're delusional." Izzy slid a single file folder across the polished surface of the desk. It was slim, almost elegant. "This is for you. A little light reading." Richard snatched it up, flipping it open with disdain. His eyes scanned the first page. It was a transcript of an email from Chloe Sterling to her father, detailing Richard's bidding strategy for the defense contract. His condescending smirk vanished, replaced by a look of confusion. He turned the page. Financial records. Wire transfers from Chloe to an offshore medical clinic. He kept turning, his breathing growing shallow. He saw faked ultrasound pictures, printouts of her purchases of silicone prosthetic bellies, a detailed timeline of her corporate espionage. His face went ashen. He looked up, his eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror. He looked from Izzy to Eleanor, searching for some sign this was a bluff. He found none. "She played me," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. The realization that he, Richard Vance, the master of the universe, had been so thoroughly duped was a blow more devastating than any financial loss. "She did," Eleanor said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was calm, devoid of triumph. "Your monumental ego was a blind spot the size of a planet. You were so busy building a fantasy, You never stopped to ask if any of it was real." "And now," Izzy continued, sliding a second, much thicker folder towards him, "let's talk about your fantasies." Richard opened this one with trembling hands. Inside were account statements, wiring instructions, names, dates, the entire structure of his secret financial world laid bare. It was all there. The Pandora Trust, the account in Zurich, the holding company in the Caymans. He stared at a photocopy of a page from his father's journal, his own father's handwriting sealing his fate. He finally looked at Eleanor, and for the first time she saw fear in his eyes. True, primal fear. Not of losing money, but of total annihilation. Of prison. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "It's very simple," Izzy said, taking over. "You are going to cede 60% of the Pandora Trust to a new, irrevocable trust set up for your son. It will be managed by an independent trustee. You will have no access to it and no control over it. You will also sign over the deed to this house, free and clear, to Eleanor. You will pay her legal fees in full. You will agree to a non-disclosure, non-disparagement agreement that carries a $50 million penalty per infraction. You will walk away." 60%? He choked out. That's everything." "No, Richard," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Everything would be me handing this folder over to the SEC and this folder to Marcus Sterling's board of directors. Everything would be watching you lose your company, your freedom, and the last shred of your reputation. I am leaving you with more than you deserve. I am leaving you with a chance to salvage the wreckage. That is more mercy than you ever showed me." He stared at her, the reality of his defeat finally sinking in. He had been outmaneuvered, outthought, and utterly beaten. He had come into the room a king, and he was leaving a pauper, stripped not just of his wealth, but of the illusion of his own power. He had lost, completely and irrevocably. He looked around the room, at the symbols of a life he had built, a life that had just been taken from him. He slowly, deliberately, closed the folders. He stood up, his shoulders slumped. He didn't look at Eleanor again. "Send the papers to my lawyer," he said, his voice a dead monotone. He walked out of the library, and out of her life, without a backward glance. The heavy oak door clicked shut, and the silence that filled the room was no longer suffocating. It was peaceful. It was the sound of victory. It was the sound of freedom. Eleanor took a deep, shuddering breath, and for the first time in months, she truly relaxed. It was over. Checkmate. 6 months later, Eleanor sat in a sun-drenched breakfast nook, not in the cold Greenwich mansion, but in a charming, light-filled brownstone in Brooklyn. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. In her arms, her son, Leo, slept peacefully, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, reassuring rhythm. The house was filled with the scent of coffee and baby powder, the sounds of a life being lived, not just displayed. She was no longer Mrs. Richard Vance, the billionaire's wife. She was Eleanor, Leo's mother, a woman who had faced the darkest betrayal and found an unshakable strength within herself. She had taken the shattered pieces of her life and built something new, something real, something that was entirely her own. Her future was a beautiful, unwritten page, and she held the pen.